As I've mentioned before, one of the funnest things about sociology is that we get to study people and their lived experience and their everyday lives. But when you're studying people, there also comes some additional ethical responsibilities. Right? If you're an economist and you're simply counting dollars in a market or GDP, then you're not going to harm anyone, or at least as directly, by doing some study on them. If you're a biologist and you're looking at cells under a microscope, you may not have to ask consent of the cell. Now, you might have to ask consent of the person giving the cell, but that's because you'd be interacting with a human. So let's talk about ethics when dealing with human subjects. So there are some core principles that we use in the field. They're guidelines. In some cases, some of the principles can be violated if an oversight board, an institutional review board, deems that it is ethical to do so. Take deception, for example. If you want to study certain conditions on student learning, you might bring them in and tell them that they're doing a study on cognition, math problems, but really you're testing temperature or lighting or priming them on negative thoughts before coming to the class or positive thoughts before coming into the class. And if you tell them up front, it would damage the findings. Then they would be tipped off. So there are cases where a little deception might be allowed, but that has to be deemed by the IRB as worth it. Basically, the amount of harm you're doing is minimal for the good that you'll be learning and hopefully the knowledge you'll be contributing to society. So let's just talk about a few key principles. One is confidentiality and privacy. If you're going to do a study on people, you can't be revealing their identities. In published journal articles, we use pseudonyms and unidentifiable information. There might be in aggregate a table about race, gender, income, GPA, and other variables, but we're not going to single out. We use pseudonyms to protect their identity. When you ask someone to participate in your study, they need to know it's voluntary. They need to be informed of what it's about. Generally speaking, I already talked about a little deception here or there based on what your IRB says. They need to know that their data, especially if you're asking more sensitive or personal questions, that it'll be protected. That it's if it's printed, it's in a locked office, in a locked cabinet. If it usually is digital, that it's in a password protected folder, that it may be destroyed after a certain amount of time. Letting people know that their privacy is important and truly taking steps to protect that is crucial. Risk of harm. Now, in biomedical research, for example, IRBs have a more challenging task because some say drug you're testing might have side effects, and to decide if it's worth trying it on certain numbers of people, or say you find out your drug is really working, but can't give it to some people in a control group because you need to see the impact of the drug. So there's a lot of ethical considerations in this. With a lot of sociological studies, there's not a biophysical harm, but there could be some emotional harm. Maybe you're doing a deep interview study about traumatic experiences people have lived through. So it's not that you can never cause any harm to a person in a study, but it has to be, your IRB has to weigh whether the amount of harm you might be doing, causing someone to relive a terrible memory or experience, is worth the output. If you're a student and you're doing this for homework, it's probably not worth asking really personal and difficult questions to somebody. If you're going to publish something that might actually help therapists or social workers, then it might be worth it. But you would want to give them informed consent, that they know the kinds of questions you're going to ask and they're agreeing to participate. I already mentioned deception. You can do a little bit of that if it's crucial for the structure of the study and approval. Vulnerable populations. If you are going to be studying, say, just students about their education experience or married people about their relationship, then that's not what we would call a vulnerable population. But if you're going to study minors, right, people under the age of 18, children, then you're going to need extra steps to make sure that the parents are on board. The IRB is going to want to do a full review, look more carefully at the steps you're taking, but not just children. It could be pregnant women. It could be incarcerated people. It could be people with highly stigmatized or conditions or illicit or illegal behavior. Maybe you want to study undocumented citizens, and so you're going to have to be extra careful about studying this vulnerable population. Or people with some kind of disabilities. The IRB will help determine the level of additional rigor you need to take in protecting more vulnerable populations. And then lastly, we should look out for conflicts of interest. You wouldn't want to be at work and have your boss come up to you and say, hey, I need you to fill out this survey on how happy you are here in this workplace, right? Because that's a person in power over you. You might not feel fully comfortable doing that. Classic story of the Stanford prison study where Philip Zimbardo was a professor at Stanford. He was the primary investigator, the PI, but he also played the role of prison warden and got to determine when people would be let out of the study and if there are conditions they should be let out. A lot of people really wanted to leave but weren't immediately able to. And this was a clear conflict of interest. And so we got to look out for putting people in situations in a study where they don't feel like they really can speak up to be no longer a participant. People should be able to voluntarily participate or stop participating at any time without fear of some kind of recourse, whether it's to their employer or financial or any form of recourse in that regard. So because we're studying people, we have to take additional considerations into account because people deserve respect and dignity. At the same time, we want to learn more about our society, and so we balance some of these concerns. We make responsible choices moving forward, and we don't do it alone. We have an IRB. Any institution taking federal funding is required to have an IRB. So that's not just universities. That's also going to be any kind of research institute, hospital, even nonprofits or government agencies that use federal money. It's a federal requirement, an institutional review board, and they have a set of structured policies that they use. I encourage you to Google the IRB webpage at your institution, read through, see what some of their policies are, how they go about setting up their review board, how they determine how to navigate some of these thorny issues when it comes with using beings as subjects in research.